Now, there's very important concept to discuss that is called as parameterization. So in TestNG, we have some annotations called as data provider, which helps us to parameterize our test. Parameterization, in the sense, let's take up an example. Let's say I have an Excel sheet. Now, in the Excel sheet, I may have different columns for username, for password, right? In this, I'll write my first username, trainer at way2automation.com, then the password, then the second username, seleniumcoaching at gmail.com, then the password, then the third username, java at way2automation.com, and the password, and so on, right? So we have data in form of rows and columns in case of a table, and at times we have to execute one test with different set of data, right? As in, there is a login functionality which I want to test it with 100 users. All 100 users are able to log in or not. So one way is that I manually test it by logging one by one. Even if I'm doing automation, I'll first provide this set of data, then I'll again manually run the test, provide this set of data, then this, right? So in order to avoid the manual execution, we can parameterize it. So TestNG provides us such a functionality through which I can provide this data in a form of a parameter, right? And then TestNG will automatically gonna execute, will iterate over the each row and will run the same test for each row. So each row will be treated as one single test, right? If there are 100 rows for 100 different data, then it will be treated as 100 different test cases. Means same test will be iterated 100 times, right? So we're going to understand it in a practical way, right? I'll be covering this Excel reading in the next section, in the next lecture itself. But before that, we'll first try to understand the concept of parameterization, right? So parameterization, how to implement parameterization? I'll add a package for parameterization test. Parameterization. Or I'll just delete it and name it as parameterization. Parameterization. And inside it, I'm going to create a class as test parameterization. Test parameterization. Now, let's say there's a test case public void do login, which accepts a username and password. Right. This is your @ test. So this username and password will be read in a form of a parameters. Maybe this will come from Excel sheet. So once we receive it, we're gonna print username and password over here. Password. Now we need a method which should supply username and password from Excel sheet over here. So we're gonna create a method called as public void get data. Right. Now this get data, this is going to provide us the data. So there's an annotation in TestNG called as @data provider, which you need to add on top of it. And this will actually going to provide the data to this test method. So we're going to say data provider equal to get data, something like this, right? But if it is going to provide us the data, the return type should not be void. Maybe it is providing the data in a form of a string, so I'm going to name it as string. The return type of method is like string, right? So now if I talk about Excel sheet, I just close it. There's a column username, password, and I'll have some dummy data right now. Right. Now what I need to do in this, the data we can see it is in a form of a string, but at times it could be in a form of a number. then what will do? What will we do? I mean, this will only going to return it in a form of a string. If I write int over here, then what if the string data comes? What if there is some boolean value? What is the data in a form of decimal? If the data is in form of a boolean, true or false, right? The data could come in any format, right? It's just not always will gonna have a string data. So I need to write a generic type over here. So there's a super type, a super class of string, integer, right? That is called as object. So the return type will be in a form of an object. Now data is not just one single data, it is in a form of multiple rows. So it is multiple set of data. So it should be an object array, right? See, don't get confused over here. See, if we are getting one single data in a form of a string, then just string, more than one data, string array. Now, not just rows, we have columns as well. So string of a two-dimensional array. Now, data could be string, could be int. So super type would be object. So this is what the return type of this method. I know this is little bit complex add to what we have discussed so far, but this is how it is being formed. Data provider, the return type is always an object of two-dimensional array, right? So this is what you need to remember, that data provider is always a two-dimensional array. Now, how to retrieve the data? If you look over here in the documentation part as well, you'll get the same thing. But the documentation is little complex. If you see over here, parameters with data provider, right? See, object of a two-dimensional array, and then creating an object of this object class and storing the data like this. So instead of doing it like this, what I can do will be creating an object of object class itself. We'll say object data equal to new object. We will give it a reference name. And here we need to pass total number of rows and total number of columns. So total number of rows in this Excel sheet, how many rows are there? Right now the data is in 2 rows. First row will not gonna count. So let's consider, I'll add one more set of data, right? 3 rows are there. So I'm gonna give 3 rows and 2 columns. And at the end, it should return the data. This is how the data will be stored. Now, data, we have not yet stored the data. Data will be stored at each indexes. So indexes will be 0, 0. At 0, 0, the first email ID, that is trainer@way2automation.com. At 0, 1, 0 row, and first column will be the password. So this will be the first set of data that will be at the first row, and like at this row, first column and the second column, right? So 0, 0 is like the first row, and this is the column. This is how the data will be stored. Same way, the second set of data and the third set of data. It will be first, then second, right? And here I'm gonna change this to, let's say, Java, and this to corporate, right? And different set of data. That's it. That is what your parameterization is, right? Now in the next lecture, this part will be replaced with the Excel reading part. That's it. Now if I save this and run this now, you're going to see that all 3 set of data has been executed. Means do login was first executed for this set of data, then for this set of data, then for this set of data. If you look in your reports, total 3 tests were executed, 3 were passed. Now one thing you need to make sure, the total rows and columns that you're giving over here, if you're giving 2 columns over here, the parameter should always be 2. Not less than that and not more than that. If you give 3 over here and run this thing again, you're gonna get an exception, data provider mismatch, right? So just you need to make sure that this should be equal to what you are providing over here. If you provide age over here or date of birth over here, something like more than the argument based on the column numbers, you'll again gonna get the same exception, data provider mismatch. So you need to make sure total number of columns is equal to the total number of arguments you're providing in this test method, right? So this is what your parameterization is. And in the next lecture, we're going to see how we can read this part of data using one of our Excel utility that we have already studied in our Java lectures. So we're going to use that utility and we're going to replace this code and dynamically we're going to read it from the Excel sheet. But this is what your parameterization is. All right. Thank you.